Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you'll hear one of two different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk about what it means for the land development industry. Other times when you tune in, like today, we have an interview style show where we have on someone who's associated with the industry. We talk about their origin story, and then we dig into some of the projects that they've worked on over the years. And today I am excited to have with me Randy Hall. Randy is the principal and CEO at Windy Hill Development based out of the Houston area. Randy, thanks for joining me.
Great, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Hope you had a good weekend.
Oh, I did. It's been a busy weekend. It was a busy weekend. It's been a busy week with all the kids' activities and things like starting and stopping, and it's kind of that time of year.
No doubt. No doubt. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, where we always like to start on the show is get a feel for our guest and kind of how they got into the real estate industry to begin with. So, could you walk us through like what, if it's something that you've always done real estate or you started down a different path and then eventually worked your way into real estate?
No, it's a interesting story, twists and turns. But I started in Dallas, early '80s in the real estate business after University of Texas, and at that time, everyone from school was going either in the direction of real estate or in petroleum land management. This was before the huge crash of the economy in the Texas and the oil producing states. So I moved to Dallas, started working as a research associate, just entry level position with one of the developers that co-developed Lakeway with the Hunts, Alan Jones, and best experience you could ever have is just getting out there and grinding and learning everything about how to research deeds and look at properties and everything that goes into that. A lot of the things that that the guys that are going through the A&M graduate program in land development do as well these days. That's what we did back in the early '80s. So my boss, the owner, passed on unexpectedly, and I moved to Houston and went to work for a developer here. We were developing an office building on Katy Freeway. We were developing the Seascape condominiums in Galveston. We were developing a mobile home park, some single family lots, just an array of different things. Great experience. And then the crash hits. And this is now, 80, 85, going into 86. And the principal of the company, they were the largest borrower with one of the savings and loans. And, we all have heard the stories about what happened in the S&L industry. He was one of the largest borrowers, and they had an in-loan commitment for the Seascape condominium. Well, when that savings loan went under, all his capital and financing sources dried up. So he told me, he said, Randy, if you can find anything, grab it. And of course, no one could have foreseen what was going to happen in the late '80s, early '90s. But it just so happened I was a resident of Galveston County growing up, and I had roommates, some guys that I had been living with. They were looking for a new place to live, and we just happened. I went with him as he was looking at an apartment on Clear Lake, which overlooked a half-developed project. It had a marina that was partially built, some townhomes that were built but not finished, this one apartment project. And I just asked the leasing agent, I said, well, do you guys own this marina? And they said, we're a part of the Resolution Trust Corporation, the government that had taken over this particular S&L. She said, we don't own that. That's a savings and loan in Florida. And so I said, well, which one? She said, I'm not sure. First Florida. And so I just went back to the office and started cold calling the next week, and just so happened to get in touch with Florida Federal Savings and Loan. And they put me in touch with the special assets guy, and he said, well, what do you do? And of course, I was almost 26 years old, and I said, oh, we're vertically integrated, which we were at the company I was with. We do development management. He said, well, why don't you come out and make a presentation to us in St. Petersburg? And I said, I'd love to. And so I told Stuart, who I was working for, and he said, listen, if you can land anything, it's all yours. He goes, Randy, I probably can only keep you for another 2 weeks or so. And he said, you can use our in-house architect if you want to do a drawing or a couple of drawings. And so I looked at what was there. I said, well, let's show this as a replat. They had, thousands of units of multifamily on Clear Lake. And the only thing that was moving were large lots, because as the oil industry collapsed, the chemical industry benefited from the low oil prices, and the chemical industry in the Bay Area, Clear Lake area was booming. So I thought, estate lots on Clear Lake. So I prepare some plats. I go out to St. Petersburg. I think I borrowed money from my mother at the time to get out there. And 26, and I'm driving across in the taxi across the causeway from Tampa to St. Petersburg. And I told the driver, I'll never forget this. I said, hey, I've got the address here for Florida Federal Savings and Loan. He goes, oh no, the Blue Zoo. And I said, the Blue Zoo, what are you talking about? He said, see that 54-story tower over there in St. Petersburg? I said, yeah. He goes, that's where you're going. I said, okay. So I walked into the entry. There's an executive, secretary there at the bottom floor, the receptionist. She said, they're waiting for you at the 54th floor. Would you like to go up? I said, sure. So I get on the elevator, had my, my briefcase and my plats and everything, go up, and the secretary greets me, and she said, they're waiting for you in the boardroom. And she opens the doors, and there's probably 20 plus bankers sitting at this huge conference table. And they look at me, and then they look behind me like, where is everybody?
Yeah.
And so I walk in, and I make the presentation, and there's an old crusty banker there, this Harvey Ziegler guy who became really a mentor and a really confidant, and learned a lot from him. And he, made the presentation. They asked a lot of questions, and he said, well, let's take you downstairs. They still have the old school executive dining room with the guys in tuxes and the silver and all that. We had lunch, and he said, Hall, that was a good presentation. But, I was expecting someone a little older. And I said, well, I could have brought my dad with me if you wanted me to. And he laughed. He goes, I like you. And so, a couple of weeks went by. We didn't hear anything. I didn't hear anything. And I'll never forget. I put a $2,000 or $3,000 management fee in the proposal. And it was a participation. I threw all these things in it. And so I thought I didn't have the deal. And I told Stuart, who I was working for, I said, I probably blew the deal by asking for that fee. And I get a call the next week from Ziegler at Florida Federal. He goes, Hall, we're going to take your deal. Meet us at Vincent and Elkins. They do all our legal work, and we're going to sign it up. And boy, that was a great day, right? So I go and meet him. There's a point to my story here. I go and meet him. He said, now you come. This is great. Looking forward to this project. You pick me up. We're going to go have dinner at the Palm, and we'll talk about some things. So I picked him up, and we went and had dinner, and we sat down, and he said, what do you think, first of all, we need to do? And I told him, and I said, first of all, we need to rename it. And he goes, what do you think? And I said, I like Marina Del Sol. So Marina Del Sol on Clear Lake is the premier waterfront estate community, along with Waterford Harbor. I did that. I'm so proud of it. It worked beautifully at the time when very few things were working. And but the lesson learned out of that, not only was it a great project, he said, I want to tell you something, Hall, don't ever sell yourself short. And I said, Harvey, what are you talking about, Harvey Ziegler? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, $3,000 a month? We would have paid you $30,000 a month. I said, I can revise he goes, no. He goes, you're going to learn a valuable lesson here. So 2 things there. That was a cold call, truly a cold call. And I don't care if that was, gosh, I hate to even admit it, 40 years ago now almost. But even today, there's nothing that takes the place of that. We do it all the time, calling sellers of land and builders that we don't know and all that. That was the first one. The second one is don't sell myself short. So that was the first project. And then, there were twists and turns as we were picking up RTC projects. We ended up buying half or a little more than half of the Bay Colony project there in League City on I-45. We did a wonderful job there. We brought HEB to that project, and it's a huge success. We're awful proud of that. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. It goes by a lot quicker than any of us like to think it does. That is for sure.
Yeah. That's a pretty cool story. And as you're telling it, I'm sitting there thinking like the hustle of it plays into like what you did, in those early years where you're just trying to find a deal, like you're trying to find a deal, something you can do, and yeah, making those calls. And I think a lot of people forget that, get back to the basics, like get back to the basics that work. I mean, we try to, in today's, just with technology and everything we have here, which I can't knock technology because that's my world. But at the same time, it's like there's still something about making that connection with somebody and being able to have a conversation with somebody versus trying to, I mean, even us right now, we're obviously doing this over a computer versus me sitting in your office, actually recording. So there's great things about technology being able to connect like this. But yeah, making those phone calls and actually putting in some of that work that people think is like old school, but it still does work.
Right. Right. Now, it's interesting you say that. Rachel, who I was talking about earlier, she heads up our acquisitions, my partner and actually my wife, and does an incredible job. In particular, we did a project where all of the properties in Fort Bend County near Needville, they were off market. They weren't even on the market. And she contacted these families and these sellers, and just through the actual interfacing with them and discussing it with them, we were able to put those together. And it's a fabulous project that Lennar is doing with Roush Coleman. But I'll say this too as well. You pointed something out, that nothing takes the place of a face-to-face meeting. I don't care if it's with a lender or a builder, or especially oftentimes a seller. Our land market is gone crazy in terms of pricing. We know that the demand from the builders, at least in this region, is incredible. There just aren't enough houses to go around, as Warren Buffett says. I think there's no truer statement than that, right? So I think the future for our industry is great, but when we're jockeying or competing for these tracks, I've often told brokers, listen, let's set up a meeting with the seller. And I don't do that just to say, oh gosh, we can, tell you a better story or whatever. But I think it's so important, as we've been on both sides of the table, I think it's so important to sit down with somebody and just say, let's get a feel for, what you guys want to do and how you intend to do it. Because, in our industry or in any other industry, there are people out there that'll tell them whatever they want to hear. We'll close it quickly. We'll pay you 5 times more. And what happens if they get to the closing statement or close to the closing statement? We need more time, or we have to cut the price. That face-to-face meeting there's nothing that takes the place of it. I don't care if it was 35 years ago or today. You're right. It is more important almost than anything, even in the day of technology.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, like getting into your company a little bit. So, Windy Hill Development, when you're talking to somebody and sharing what it is that you do as a company, like how would you explain what your company does?
Yeah, great question. I think what we like to tell people, and it's true, we develop boutique planned communities. We're not Newland or Johnson. Those guys do such a great job at what they do. And that niche, they really have a strong presence and lead that niche. And we all look at those guys and compliment them on such a good job. And I've known a bunch of guys over there for years. But what we I guess for and I don't really know why people have asked me, but most of my career, except for the Marina Del Sol project, which is high end, I've really gravitated and developed lots for the entry level builders. Somebody commented one time that they said, "Hey, you're the Dollar General developer, aren't you?" And I laughed. They said, "Take that as a compliment." And so, really, we position ourselves to develop the entry level communities, but we like to believe we do it in a way where we add a little bit more, where that buyer feels like, we're not just getting a bare bones community. We have one now that we're about to deliver lots in near Lake Houston, on the east side of Lake Houston, where you see the higher end communities now doing the things like farmers markets and doing the HOA does the monthly events and things like that, which we'll be offering in our entry level communities. So we call them boutique communities. We're an entry level developer. We deal with the usual suspects in that space, which are the Lennars and the Hortons and the KBs and the LGIs and all those guys. Great relationships with them, but that's really where we've carved out our niche.
Okay. And then what is it about the Houston area that has you doing business there?
Well, first of all, we're from here, and we've done a lot of things here over the years. I did look at and spent quite a bit of time right when the build to rent, when all of that activity started, and I guess I started looking at that in about 2016, and did a lot of work in multiple markets, Austin, all the Texas markets. Austin said we actually went to Boise, we went to Salt Lake, we went Texas, Austin, Houston, Dallas, and we had sites that we were competing on and trying to figure that out right before COVID hit. We had some capital partners that were ready to go. We had builders that were ready to go, and COVID hit. We didn't really, any of us knew what was going to happen in our industry or anything else. And so we pulled back and said, let's wait on the build to rent and focus on what we do. And that was deliver lots for the single family builders. Well, now looking back, we saw what happened. The market exploded. Everybody wanted to be in homes, not multifamily. And so our pipeline we just got so busy so quickly. We added more people, and we just focused on Houston. And looking back, that was, it wasn't because we were smarter. We were just lucky that we decided to do that because, as we all know, then inflation kicks in, and a lot of those build to rent forward purchase projects had to be recapitalized because inflation was so high. So we were just, I guess we just we're fortunate to make the right decision at that time and say, let's focus on Houston. Land prices were obviously more attractive than or cheaper than they are now. So we were able to go out we teamed up with a great land bank partner at that time. And we went out and made some large acquisitions for us that were, 400 or 500 plus acres for master plan boutique communities that we're developing through now. At the same time, we're always looking and competing and offering on other tracks. But we have, I guess, 6 active communities right now, totaling about, 5,500 lots at completion. So we got a lot on our plate, but the market remains strong, and I think, obviously there will always be cycles and bumps in the road, if you will. But I think just because there is such a shortage of single family homes, not only in Texas but across the nation, I think our industry is really set up for a positive growth in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, completely agree. And you mentioned there, as you were, as you've been going through just the hiring process, right? So you've been bringing on, growing the team and everything like that. So, you talked about Rachel being your wife and then also your partner in this. How do you go about choosing the right people for your team?
Again, another good question. It's hard.
Yeah.
There is no doubt. And, one of the, we have our lead analyst here, Logan Marchman, who's a phenomenal job. Logan went through the master's program at Texas A&M University, which Tim Early runs that program and has done such a phenomenal job. I think if you were to talk to any developer in the Houston area or any builder in the Houston area, there is someone in one of their organizations that went through that master's program. And Logan went through that program and came on board as an intern. I talked to Tim and I said, hey, I talked to a number of people through the Houston area, and they laughed. They said, what are you looking for? And I said, well, really, we need a replacement for an analyst. And they laughed. They said, well, if we find one, we're going to hire them first. and then one of a close contact, a financial advisor to one of our MUDs, he said, have you talked to Tim Early? And I remember Tim was running the program there at A&M. And I called Tim, had a great conversation with him. And he said, listen, I've got some interns and some graduates, and introduced me to several of those. And Logan came aboard several years ago and just came on full time. So that program, and we're actually talking to some now about coming aboard and doing the same thing as an intern. And then our director of development, Alan Mueller, who has been in the industry for, he and I, hate to admit, probably as long as, each other, have known each other 20 plus years. He's an engineer. He's a former city manager, assistant city manager, and then went to the development side. So we were lucky that Alan was able to join our team, and as a director of development. But we're always looking for other people to help Alan, to help Logan do what they do. And I say this a lot. Houston's a huge city, 7.2 million, but it's a small industry. And so, we're always talking to people and looking for other people to help us grow our team, because I will say this: there is no way that one person, or even two people can do what we do. And even outside of our team here, we deal with some of the best brokers in Houston. You got Keegan Cunningham, who's a great broker. You got Dave Ramsey, great brokers in Houston. Those guys, without those guys, Seth Green, you just can't do what we do. And I say it a lot. I like to give brokers a hard time, but the good ones are worth their weight in gold, because they know what they're doing. They manage their sellers' expectations. There's a lot of brokers out there that'll tell, and it creates problems for developers when we're trying to buy dirt, but they'll tell them anything they want to hear in terms of value. And then, we have to bear that cross when we go out there and say, well, here's the reality of what it's worth. But without the brokers, without the great engineers, the financial advisors, there's no way one person or two or three people could do what we do. So yeah, we're always trying to grow our team and look for great people.
Yeah, it's interesting bringing up A&M. I've had probably two of sometime in the last like 6 episodes. I've had a couple people who are graduates from A&M who were on the show, and so they talked about I'm pretty sure they talked about the real estate experience there and everything. So it does seem to be, even in my small ecosystem of people that I've had on the show and everything, just the fact that 2 of these recent episodes have had people from A&M and going through school there and everything. The real estate program is cool that you brought that up.
Oh, it's a great program. Tim has done a phenomenal job, and Jim Russ at EHRA, the engineering company, has been such a huge supporter of that program. And Jim, really introduced me to a number of other people involved in it. Danny Signorelli is involved in that program. Those are all Aggies. I'm a Longhorn, so I always tell them that they can always aspire to do greater things as we do. And of course, that's, great competition among us. But yeah, those guys do a phenomenal job at A&M. And I think there's only, if I'm not mistaken, there's only 1 or 2 other programs in the country that offer that master's in land development. So really really a deep pool of talent there that a lot of people can source for their teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at some of the other projects that you've worked on, over the years, you mentioned the Marina Del Sol project, back that you got started on. Are there any others that kind of stand out in your mind as ones that, I don't know, maybe they're the ones that were a favorite project, or one that was super challenging, so it really sticks out in your mind? Do you have one that you could talk about?
I and I talked to Tim early about this too. Everyone, because I asked him, I said, Tim, what is it? How do you go about your curriculum? And he said, Randy, what I do is teach my curriculum for, that we go over at the beginning of the year, the syllabus or whatever they call it. And he goes, and then I talk to him about actually what happens in our world of development, which everything that can go wrong does. And so we're working on a project now, an example that we negotiated, heavily negotiated an agreement for the entitlements, the creation of a special finance district. And if you read about it in a textbook, you connect the dots. You go to the city and you negotiate the agreement, and they give you the entitlements, and it all works great, and everybody's happy, right? Well, starting off, the city, who had very little development in the last 50 years, 75 years, they had hired a city manager who we'd come to work with very closely, who didn't have any development experience either. The city was financially strapped. And so she goes out and hires, when we start talking about creating a special finance district. And, we're all familiar with the MUDs and the PIDs and all these things that we use as development tools, which she wasn't familiar with. And there's just a never ending, number of those special finance attorneys throughout the Houston market. Now they do such a great job. Rob Seal at ABHR is our MUD attorney, who's just a phenomenal attorney. Tim Green at Coates Rose. So many special finance district attorneys. So the city manager goes out and hires a litigator from Austin to conduct the negotiations to create a special finance district. Well, I don't need to tell you any more than the fact that he's a litigator to tell you what happened during the process of creating this special finance district. A 3-month process went to 18 months, very contentious, and we negotiate the agreements and we have the capacity reserved. And about 4 or 5 months ago, Alan Mueller, our development director, came in and he said, "We've got a huge problem." And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Well, the city just notified us that they don't have the capacity in their plant to serve us." Now, Ryan, we've closed our development loan. We are filing our plats. We are ready to start construction. We're drawing from, we're working with our lender and our builders and all, and everybody's ready for lots to be delivered. And we had a call from the city and said, "Oh, well, we have capacity in the plant. We just don't have the ability to actually transport your flows from point A to point B." And we said, "Well, how do you fix that?" And they said, "Oh, it's $12 million. You guys need to fix it." We threw our hands in the air. Well, those things seem to happen on every project. We actually went to the city. The city said, "We're going to fix it ourselves." And so we've now, the project's back on track, and it's a great project, and everybody will be happy. But it just seems like every single project, if there's always something that we look at and go, "Wow, no one saw that coming." And I've often said for years too, to people in our industry, I said, if you find that easy one, I just want 10% of the easy project. I don't want the whole thing, because the low-hanging fruit that we always hear about, I think that's urban lore, that there's never such a thing. So the Bay Colony project years ago, that was a phenomenal project in itself. Again, it was a victim of the crash in the 80s, and Trendmaker, the Weyerhaeuser subsidiary, they do such a incredible job in development and building the high-end production housing. They owned it. They actually asked me, because I was from the Galveston County area, and there was a battle from a previous developer, and there was a legal challenge and all that going on. They asked me if I'd be a consultant, and I said sure. And it just so happened we went on for about a year. And they finally, the president of Trendmaker at the time came to me and he said, "We want to sell that 450 acres. Would you be interested in buying it?" And I'll share this with you because the metrics, they're incredible, and you never hear stories like this. And it had a less pendants on it because our notice of litigation, because of the prior development, and I was just acting as a consultant for them. And I said, "Well, you've got litigation ongoing with this property." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "But we think," and this was like in the beginning of 1995, and he said, "We think we'll have that resolved by the end of the year." And we said, "Okay, well, let's talk about buying it." And some crazy number, some $5,000 an acre. Now, this was freeway frontage with 400 acres, utilities in, a huge mud receivable. And we get to December, and the litigation hadn't been resolved. It's on appeal at the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans, and you couldn't get clear title. And he called me and he goes, "Hey, Randy, we have to close this by the end of the year." And I told him, I said, "Well, there's no way. You can't deliver a title policy." And he goes, "Well, what if we finance it for you?" And I said, "Okay, that's an idea. Let me think about that." And I called him back, and he said, "What do you think you could do?" And I said, "How about $5,000 down?" Now, this was 450 acres on the Gulf Freeway, And he just laughed. He goes, "You got to be kidding me." And he goes, "All right, well, let me check with Washington with Weyerhaeuser to make sure that qualifies under the IRS code as an installment sale." And I said, "Okay." He called me back and he goes, "This is incredible." He goes, "They're requiring me that you have to have a down payment of at least $10,000." And I said, "Done." So we ended up buying the 450 acres on the freeway, which is right at 646 and Bay, which was Bay Colony, and we developed as Bay Colony with a $10,000 down payment, and eventually paid off the land in about a year and a half when the Les Pendants was removed, and started developing the project, which became one of the most successful projects in Galveston County. But how that came about and the actual steps that we had to take to get through it, to get the litigation resolved. And the most interesting thing was, about a year after we bought it, we couldn't do anything for a year because the other developer again had that litigation ongoing. So we finally settled with the other developer so we could both live and let live and start developing. And about 2 weeks after we settled it, the Fifth Circuit overturned in favor of the seller who we bought it from, and we would have owned the entire thing. But it all turned out great
Yeah.
for everybody. But just the things that happened during those days of the RTC and the crash, and fortunately, it didn't happen again during the Great Recession in 2007 and 8 and 9, or 8, 9, and 10, because the government came and bailed out the banks and took all the special assets off their books. But we dodged a bullet. There's a lot of you hear discussions every day about there's so much debt in this country and it's unmanageable, and at some point we're going to have a day of reckoning. I believe that. But in terms of what we do, we still have to deliver lots. And I mentioned it earlier, as Warren Buffett said, there are just not enough houses to go around because of what happened in the Great Recession. And the builders stopped building, and the developers stopped developing, and the banks stopped lending. So we still have anywhere from, I hear, from a shortage in the Houston area of 400,000 to 500,000 homes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be like you said earlier. That makes for the next 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years or whatever. It makes for should be some good times for the development community and for builders to be able to play catch up on some of that. And assuming we get the right policies and everything like that in place as well. The more of the supply side incentives versus the demand side incentives to to help our industry and everything like that.
No doubt. Let me just mention one thing that you touched on something too. With the growth in the region and all. And I remember going to one of the region or the Institute for Regional Forecasting that Dr. Barton Smith held every year in Houston, and was a forecast on what the future looks like for not only Houston, but Texas and as the region in a whole. He did a little bit about the national news, but he asked a question. This was years before he retired, and they still do it with a brilliant new economist. But Dr. Smith asked a question of the crowd there, about 2,000 or 3,000 people. He said, we have this huge population growth. Houston at that time was 6 million. He said it's supposed to be 7 million in the next 10 years and 12 million by 2050. He goes, how many people here believe that's due to migration from Central and Mexico and Central and South America? That was before the huge immigration, debate right now. And most everyone, including myself, raised their hand. And he said, how about migration from Europe or Asia or whatever? A few people raised their hand. And he said, how about domestic repopulation? People that are already here, having families, and those families are growing up and then going out and buying houses and starting their own families. Very few people raised their hand. And he said, Houston and Dallas and Austin have reached a point of critical mass where domestic repopulation is what's happening in our cities. He goes, and this is before the huge migration numbers started happening. So, it even increases the number of what he was talking about. But the demand, he said, the demand for homes just from the people that are here having families is what's going to fuel that number from 7 million to 12 million people. He said something else that's very interesting. He said, the immigrant that comes to Houston, wherever they're from and wherever they're legal or illegal, within 10 years, they will have put a child through college and they will have purchased a new home. That's pretty powerful if you think about it.
Yeah.
It says a lot about, the immigration too, about whether or not you agree with the policies. It says a lot about the people that are coming here and how hard they're willing to work to achieve the American dream. So that's a great thing too. I always remember that because I thought that was such an interesting statistic.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I didn't know that. I didn't know that stat about down there. So I'm located in I'm in the Des Moines, Iowa area. So like a lot of the some of the I dig into a lot of the Texas news and things of that nature, but I'm not living there and not around it.
Sure.
I don't have the history that you have either. So that's pretty cool. Well, the last thing here I want to dig into. So there's a section on the show where we go through what I call a lightning round, where I've got 5 questions that I put together that I'll just run by you just to get your thoughts on them. And just looking for, like a short response to them, like a minute, something like that for each of these here. Some of them may take a little longer than that, depending on how much you want to elaborate on them. But one of these kind of feeds into what you were just talking about. You talked about some of the projects that you've worked on, and basically every project you work on is going to have some sort of issue come up that you have to be able to overcome or handle. And so first question is, what skill do you think is most important in land development? Is it that adaptability, or is there something else that you think that is most important to be a good developer?
Persistence.
Okay.
If you're not, you're going to get knocked down in this business. Again, I'll go back to Tim early at A&M. He likes to ask their students, how many want to be real estate developers? And they all raise their hand. He said, how many of you want to go broke twice before you ever do it, before you make any money? And it's truly persistence. I talk to people, young people in our industry too, that you have to be persistent. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to have these problems come up. Murphy's law is going to kick in. Your best pro forma is going to get cut by 20%. And I'll end the answer by saying what Stuart Goldman, the guy I first worked for, used to tell me. He said, if you can live by the 50-50 rule in development, you'll do fine. You'll make 50% less on every project you do, and it'll take you 50% longer. And that's true. So it's persistence. There's no doubt.
All right. Awesome. All right. Second one here. This one I feel like you've already touched on a little bit, but I'll ask it anyway. What's a mistake that you've made in development, and how can others avoid it?
It's the oldest, adage in real estate. You make your money when you buy real estate, not when you sell it. And I was involved and co-developed one of the only retail projects, not the HEB project I mentioned in Bay Colony, but I did a Target Home Depot project in Galveston, where we really, and I had a partner who was a retail partner and, was not experienced in that arena. And we paid too much for the land, and we paid too much for the land based on what we thought the improvement in the value was going to be. And, in this day and age, and you're right, we talked about it earlier, with land prices all over the country, you read an Urban Land Institute, the prices have gone crazy. It's hard. It's hard to be patient. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they pay too much, thinking that, the upside growth in my project is going to create more value. If it doesn't pencil and it doesn't perform when you're looking at buying it, don't do it. And, you always hear from, Wall Street guys that patience in investing is the hardest thing to do. No different from us. You've got to be patient, and you got to make your money when you buy the real estate.
All right. Love it. All right. Third one here. How do you handle issues that come up during a project?
Crisis management. It's one of those things that truly, again, it's never as bad as you think. It's never as good as you think. So you just have to take a step back. And as everyone's seen Apollo 13, the movie with Tom Hanks, and, when the Apollo 13 and the flight director, Gene Kranz, who actually I grew up with his family and known Gene all my life, when he said, let's work the problem, people, let's work the problem. And so, if you go back and you just sit down and you think, okay, and this is where Alan is such a pro, with his experience, is let's just step back and look at how do we solve this. Let's go to the city, let's go to our lender, let's go to the builders, and let's all collectively work the problem. And I know it's a simple statement, but if you just start breaking it down and figure out how do you solve it, then you can typically work towards a solution. Now, example I gave you a while back, our pro forma is not nearly what it was before that city couldn't deliver the capacity to us, but we still work through it, and it's still a viable deal. So I think you just got to work the problem. You got to take it one step at a time and see what does it take to solve it, and bring everybody in early rather than later. Let your builders know, let your lenders know, hey, let the cities know we're working through this. How do we do it collectively?
Yeah. All right, next one here. We have quite a few people who listen into the show who are relatively new in the land development space, and so this one is one that kind of goes out to them. What considerations should someone take into account when deciding on who to partner with for a real estate deal?
Wow, that probably that's the best question you ask. Um, without naming names, no. When I was young and starting off in the business, and you so desperately want to go out and do bigger projects and things like that, and it is so important. It's so important, starting out especially, to really carefully choose your partners and make sure, and in this case, when as a young developer, you're putting in the sweat equity, you're out doing the research and finding the project, typically you're looking for a capital partner. Well, I found what I thought were capital partners a couple times, and at that point I was in my mid to late 20s, and you didn't have maybe the guts to say, show me your financial statements so I can make sure you're who I think you are. And so I got involved with a couple capital partners who, once I saddled up with them, they were like, well, we don't have the money, but we'll go out and find it. And so it's so important to choose the right partner. It's been said before, you spend more time with your business partners than you do with your married partner. Well, in my case, I've got the same one in both, so
Yeah.
maybe but no, and I'm a lucky man. But I will say that process of really choosing your partners, let me take it a step further, and choosing your lenders. A lot of people think that, oh my gosh, the bank's willing to do this loan for me, or I'm lucky to do this. Don't think about it that way. They're in the business of making money, no different than a developer is, or someone in another industry. So choose your lenders very carefully. Choose your partners very carefully. But at the end of the day, if you're starting out in this business, and gosh, I bought foreclosures, resale foreclosures, to remodel and sold those. I did ones and twos of those to make money to feed the process of going through due diligence on buying larger tracts. Anything like that in real estate gives you the experience to understand how the process works with looking at title, and looking at a tract to see what it's zoned, and looking at floodplain and wetlands, all those things that seem so simple, but people often overlook those. It's still the bread and butter of what we do, and you just can't miss those things. So go out, roll your sleeves up, and just do it. But be careful who you choose as a partner. You'll find plenty of capital out there if you have the right project. It's a picket fence, as a guy used to say. You'll go down the picket fence and you'll find somebody that'll partner up with you. Just make sure you find the right one.
Yeah. All right, last one here. This one is one that I've actually had a couple people ask me when asking for feedback from people, and so I'm interested to get your thoughts on it. So this one is, let's say that someone inherits land from their family. What's a good first step to take to understand what the value of that land could be? Is that finding a real estate professional? Is there things that they can do on their own that they should maybe dig into and try to figure out if it's something like what they want to do with the land, basically?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the first thing that they should do, find a good broker, even if they're not interested in selling their property at that point. But finding a good broker, a commercial broker, and residential brokers are great. They're great for what they do, but sometimes that's not who you want advising you on a piece of real estate that you're looking to potentially develop. Find a good commercial broker. I mentioned, a couple earlier today. Those guys are a wealth of information, and they'll tell you, listen, this is a great market for single family, but you're going to have to drill your own water well, or you're going to have to build your own sewage treatment plant. Heavily capitalized in terms of project needs. Or this is a great site for a multifamily apartment project. Or are you aware that you have floodplain on your project, or an abundance of wetlands on your project, or you have a city that's zoned and doesn't want multifamily, or doesn't want any new small lot entry level homes. All those things that go into underwriting a site that are so important for a landowner, because our business looks easy, right? Oh gosh, I'll be a developer. I'm going to go buy a piece of land and put 100 lots in. Well, 3 years later, they're sitting there. They don't have anything, and they're in a battle with the city. It's so important to find a real estate professional, like you said, who can at least start you on the process to understand what you have and how you would potentially take the next step. And it doesn't have to be 100 acres. It could be a 10-acre site. It could be a 1 acre. Do I turn that into a commercial site for a pharmacy, or is it better suited for a large lot? Doesn't matter the size. If you can find a really good broker in your area, in your region, start with them.
Okay. Oh, that sounds good. Like a good plan. All right. Well, I guess what does the rest of this year and next year and kind of your future look like for you and your team?
Well, as I said, we have our sleeves rolled up right now. We've got 6 projects. We've got Lennar and DR Horton and MI Homes and Hart Homes, a bunch of great builders in these projects. So we're just working as hard as we can to churn out lots. At the same time, we're looking for new opportunities in and around the Houston region. So to do that, we're going to have to add people. So it's a never ending cycle. Like I said, I've been in this for 40 years almost now. I want to retire, but I love what I do. And I guess that's one of the biggest blessings, is that I do love this. I will say this as we end, don't get in a hurry, because my grandfather, who was a banker for years, he had a sign in his office that said the definition of an overnight success is about 11 years. And so anybody that wants to get in this business, just remember, it's not going to happen overnight. I've been doing it 40 years. I love it. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. We got a great market here in Houston, perhaps around the country, for single families. So it's a great industry, and we're thankful to be doing what we're doing.
Awesome. I guess the last thing is, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you or learn more about your company?
WindyHill.land is our website. So just please go to, WindyHill.land, and you'll see our team, our projects. And if there's anything we can talk about with you guys, we'd be excited for that opportunity.
Awesome. Well, those of you listening in, the links and everything discussed here will be on the show notes page. So you can check the description. You'll see the links there. And Randy, I really appreciate you hopping on with me and talking through this. I mean, this was, time went really fast. I was just looking up and we're almost at 50 minutes. And usually these episodes are like 30 minutes. So we covered a lot here, and this was super interesting. And everybody listening in, if you haven't already subscribed to the show, click that button. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next week.